Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The Smiling Nightlight. I never imagined a simple nightlight could become a source of terror. It all started when my son, Lucas, began complaining about the darkness in his room. "Daddy, the shadows move," he'd whisper, clutching his stuffed rabbit. So, I installed a small nightlight, innocuous, with a friendly face that was supposed to bring comfort. Little did I know, this tiny object would unravel the fabric of our lives. The nightlight had a simple design, a smiling face with large eyes and a round nose. During the day, it seemed harmless, a whimsical addition to Lucas's room. But when night fell and the room plunged into darkness, the face on the nightlight transformed. The smile seemed to widen, stretching into something sinister. The eyes, once playful, became hollow and piercing, as if they could see through the shadows into a different realm. Lucas was the first to notice. "Daddy, the light is scary," he said, his voice trembling. At first, I dismissed his fears as childish imagination. But then I started hearing it, the faint sound of whispers when I walked past his room at night. They were just on the edge of perception, almost inaudible, like a distant conversation in an ancient language. I convinced myself it was the wind or maybe the creaking of the old house. One night, the atmosphere shifted. I woke up to a cold breeze brushing my face. The house was eerily silent, except for the faint murmur coming from Lucas's room. I tiptoed down the hall, the floorboards groaning under my weight. As I reached his door, I felt a chill run down my spine. The whispers were clearer now, a chorus of unsettling tones that seemed to chant in a rhythm. My heart raced as I pushed open the door. Lucas was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the nightlight. The room felt different, darker, colder. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension. I glanced at the nightlight, and my blood ran cold. The face on the nightlight was grinning widely, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent glow. It wasn't just a trick of the light or my imagination, it was something more, something real. The whispers grew louder, almost as if they were laughing at my fear. "Daddy, make it stop," Lucas whimpered, breaking the silence. His voice snapped me out of my trance. I rushed to the nightlight and unplugged it, but the room remained dimly lit. The smile lingered in the darkness, mocking me. The whispers ceased, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. I grabbed Lucas and held him close, feeling his little heart pound against my chest. We left the room and spent the rest of the night on the living room couch, huddled together. As dawn broke, I returned to Lucas's room, expecting everything to return to normal in the daylight. But the nightlight was gone, replaced by an ordinary plug. It was as if the sinister face and the whispers had never existed. Yet, Lucas and I both knew the truth. The nightlight had brought something into our home, something ancient, something evil. And it wasn't finished with us yet. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in our house. Lucas refused to sleep in his room, insisting on staying in my bed. I didn't argue, I felt safer with him close. The nightlight had been removed, but the sense of unease lingered. Every night, I would hear the faint sound of footsteps in the hall, the whispering just beyond the door. It felt as if we were being watched. One evening, as I was putting Lucas to bed, he grabbed my hand and whispered, "Daddy, they're in the hallway." His voice was low, trembling with fear. I looked into his eyes, and I could see the terror in them. He wasn't just scared, he was petrified. I knew I had to do something, but what? How do you fight shadows and whispers? I tucked him in and promised to keep the door open, leaving a lamp on in the hallway. That night, I decided to stay up, determined to confront whatever was haunting us. I sat in the living room, staring at the hallway, the lamp casting long, eerie shadows. Midnight came, and the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The whispers started again, soft at first, then growing louder. They seemed to echo from every corner, a chorus of disembodied voices. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the hallway. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. My heart raced as I stood up, my hands trembling. I walked towards the hallway, my footsteps silent on the carpet. The shadows seemed to dance on the walls, flickering in the dim light. I reached Lucas's door and peered inside. He was asleep, clutching his stuffed rabbit, his little face peaceful despite the chaos around us. I turned back to the hallway, my eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, like a storm gathering strength. Then I saw it, a figure at the end of the hall, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and thin, with long arms that hung at its sides. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me. I wanted to run, to grab Lucas and leave, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The figure moved closer, gliding silently down the hallway. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in the dim light. As it approached, I felt a crushing weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. The figure stopped a few feet away from me, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, it spoke. "He is ours," the voice was a guttural whisper, filled with malice. "You cannot protect him." The words sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was smiling, that same sinister smile from the nightlight. Panic surged through me, and I found the strength to move. I rushed into Lucas's room, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, my hands shaking. Lucas woke up, startled. "Daddy, what's wrong?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. I pulled him close, trying to steady my breathing. "Nothing, buddy. Just a bad dream," I lied, hoping to calm him. But as I held him, I knew that the nightmare was just beginning. The thing in the hallway wasn't done with us. It wanted my son, and it wouldn't stop until it had him. After that night, I became obsessed with finding a way to protect Lucas. Sleep was a rare luxury. Every creak and groan of the house filled me with dread. The whispers had become a constant background noise, a sinister soundtrack to our lives. I scoured the internet for any mention of similar experiences, desperate for answers. Most forums dismissed such occurrences as hallucinations or overactive imaginations. But one thread caught my eye, a discussion about haunted objects and how to cleanse them. The post described various methods of purification, salt circles, burning sage, and reciting incantations. One user, under the alias Watcher, claimed to have expertise in dealing with malevolent spirits. They detailed a ritual that supposedly banished entities tied to objects. It sounded absurd, but I was desperate. The ritual required specific items: black candles, a bowl of salt, and a small mirror. I gathered everything and waited for nightfall. As darkness enveloped the house, I set up the ritual in Lucas's room. I placed the mirror on his dresser, reflecting the spot where the nightlight had once stood. The candles were arranged in a circle around the mirror, their flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. Lucas sat on the bed, clutching his stuffed rabbit, his eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "What's going on, Daddy?" he asked, his voice small. I forced a reassuring smile. "Just a little game, buddy." To keep the bad dreams away, I lied, hoping to calm him. I took a deep breath and began the incantation, reading from a handwritten note I'd copied from the forum. The words felt strange on my tongue, foreign and ancient. The air in the room grew thick, and a cold draft seemed to seep through the walls. The whispers intensified, now a cacophony of indistinct voices. As I reached the final verse, the room seemed to darken, the candle flames flickering wildly. The mirror on the dresser began to fog up, and then, slowly, a shape appeared on its surface. It was the same grinning face from the nightlight, its eyes hollow and staring. My heart pounded in my chest as I continued the incantation, my voice barely steady. The face in the mirror twisted into a grotesque smile, and the whispers rose to a fever pitch. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, a thin line splintering across its surface. The room plunged into darkness as the candles snuffed out simultaneously. The temperature dropped, and I felt a cold, oppressive presence fill the space. Lucas screamed, and I grabbed him, shielding him with my body. In the darkness, the whispers morphed into laughter, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed in the pitch-black room. A voice, deep and menacing, spoke from the shadows. "Foolish man. You cannot banish what has always been here." The words seemed to vibrate through the room, making the air hum with energy. I felt a surge of panic. This wasn't just a malevolent spirit, it was something ancient and powerful, something beyond my comprehension. The entity was toying with us, feeding off our fear. The laughter faded, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the room began to shake, the walls vibrating as if something immense was trying to break through. The pressure was unbearable, like being trapped under a crushing weight. I held Lucas close, whispering that everything would be all right, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. The room was filled with a blinding light, and then, just as quickly, it was gone. When I opened my eyes, the room was as it had been, no cracked mirror, no black candles, just the ordinary furniture and toys. Lucas was sobbing quietly, clinging to me. I looked around, disoriented. Had it worked? Had the ritual banished the entity? But deep down, I knew it hadn't. The thing wasn't gone, it was simply waiting, watching. And I feared that the worst was yet to come. The days after the ritual were eerily quiet. The whispers had ceased, and the oppressive presence seemed to have lifted. Lucas was still afraid, but his night terrors had stopped. For a moment, I dared to hope that we had rid ourselves of the entity. But the silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, as Lucas slept soundly beside me, I was jolted awake by a sharp, cold breath on my neck. My eyes snapped open, and I found myself staring into the darkness. The air was thick and cold, and I felt a presence beside the bed. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a drum. I turned on the lamp, casting a warm glow over the room, but nothing was there. The room was empty, yet the sensation of being watched was palpable. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the air grew colder. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I saw my breath mist in the air. Then, a soft, familiar humming filled the room, the same eerie tune Lucas used to hum when he was younger. It sent a shiver down my spine. The lights flickered again, and then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. I reached out for Lucas, but my hand met only empty space. Panic surged through me as I called his name, but there was no response. I stumbled out of bed, frantically searching for him in the dark. My hands grasped at nothing, and I felt a rising dread. Then, I saw it, the faint glow of a figure standing in the doorway. It was Lucas, or at least, it looked like him. But something was wrong. His eyes were blank, devoid of any emotion. He stared at me with an unsettling calmness, a small, twisted smile playing on his lips. "Daddy, come play with us," he said, his voice a chilling echo of the entity's earlier taunts. The room seemed to warp around me, the walls closing in. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic than ever. They were all around me, overlapping in a chaotic symphony. The figure in the doorway stepped forward, and I realized with horror that it wasn't Lucas. It was the entity, using my son's form as a guise. The air grew colder, and the figure's smile widened into a grotesque grin. "You cannot escape," it whispered, the voice distorted and inhuman. Desperation clawed at me. I had to save Lucas, but how? My mind raced, and then I remembered the broken mirror from the ritual. I grabbed the shard from under the bed, its surface reflecting the dim light from the hallway. The figure recoiled slightly, as if the mirror's presence disturbed it. With a surge of courage, I thrust the shard towards the entity. The whispers crescendoed, and the air became thick with static. The figure's smile faltered, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something else in its eyes, fear, perhaps. The entity screamed, a high-pitched, inhuman wail that reverberated through the house. The lights flickered back on, and the room seemed to distort, the walls rippling as if reality itself was being torn apart. The figure lunged at me, but I held the mirror shard between us, using it as a shield. Then, everything went silent. The entity vanished, the whispers stopped, and the air warmed. I was alone, standing in the middle of the room, holding the shard. I collapsed to my knees, trembling. It was over. Or so I thought. As I looked around, I realized Lucas was still missing. I searched the house frantically, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, I found him, sitting in his room, playing with his stuffed rabbit as if nothing had happened. He looked up at me, his eyes clear and innocent. "Daddy, did you play with the smiling man?" he asked, tilting his head. My blood ran cold. The entity had left, but its influence lingered. Lucas seemed unaware of the night's events, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The house felt different, as if something had changed. The shadows seemed deeper, and the silence more pronounced. We were safe, for now. But as I looked into Lucas's eyes, I knew the entity wasn't gone. It was just biding its time, waiting for the right moment to return. And next time, I feared, it wouldn't be so easy to banish. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Midnight Caller. I had never been superstitious. Ghost stories and urban legends always seemed like nothing more than the fanciful imaginings of the bored and overly imaginative. But everything changed when I bought my new phone. It was sleek and modern, a state-of-the-art piece of technology that I had saved up for months to afford. Excited to use it, I transferred all my contacts and apps, eager to start exploring its features. The novelty quickly wore off, however, as I soon began receiving strange calls every night at midnight. The first call came just 3 days after I bought the phone. I was lying in bed, drifting off to sleep, when the sharp ring jolted me awake. I groggily reached for the phone on my nightstand and squinted at the screen. The caller ID read "number not in service." Confused but not yet alarmed, I answered the call. Silence greeted me on the other end, followed by heavy, labored breathing. I waited for the person to speak, but after a minute of nothing but eerie breaths, I hung up and dismissed it as a prank. The next night, the call came again at exactly midnight. This time, I hesitated before answering. When I finally picked up, the same heavy breathing echoed in my ear. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking slightly. The breathing continued, slow and deliberate, sending chills down my spine. I hung up again, feeling a creeping sense of unease. Was someone watching me? How did they get my number? By the third night, I was on edge. I spent the evening trying to distract myself, but as the clock approached midnight, my anxiety grew. I clutched my phone tightly, staring at it with dread. When it rang, I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. The caller ID once again read "number not in service." This time, I didn't answer. I watched as the call went to voicemail, then quickly checked the message. There was nothing but the sound of that same unsettling breathing. Desperate for answers, I reached out to the phone company the next day. The customer service representative was polite but unhelpful. They confirmed that the number was indeed not in service and suggested it might be a technical glitch. Unsatisfied, I began to research online, delving into forums and message boards where people discussed similar experiences. The stories I found were disturbingly similar to mine: calls from non-existent numbers, heavy breathing, and a sense of being watched. That night, I prepared myself for the call. I had my laptop open, ready to record the conversation, and a notepad to jot down any details. When the call came, I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The breathing was there, just as before, but this time, it was accompanied by faint whispers. I strained to make out the words, but they were too muffled, too distant. "Who are you? What do you want?" I asked, my voice rising in desperation. There was a pause, and then, for the first time, the breathing stopped. A voice, barely audible, whispered, "You took what was mine." I froze, my blood running cold. "What do you mean?" I stammered, but the call ended abruptly, leaving me with a dial tone and a growing sense of dread. I didn't sleep that night, the voice echoing in my mind. What had I taken? What did they want from me? The next morning, I could hardly function. The whispering voice from the previous night replayed in my head like a broken record. You took what was mine. What could it mean? I rummaged through my memories, trying to think of anything I might have done to provoke this haunting. The phone, I realized. Everything started with the new phone. But how could a piece of technology be the source of such terror? Determined to get to the bottom of this, I visited the store where I had purchased the phone. The clerk who had sold it to me was a cheerful young woman with a bright smile. When I explained my situation, her expression shifted from confusion to concern. We've never had any complaints like this before, she said. But I can check the phone's history for you. She took the device and connected it to her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. After a few minutes, she looked up, her face pale. This phone, it was returned by the previous owner. Apparently, they claimed it was cursed. My heart skipped a beat. Cursed? Are you serious? I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief and fear. The clerk nodded slowly. They said they started receiving strange calls after buying it, just like you. We thought it was a joke or a coincidence, so we reset the phone and put it back on the shelf. She looked at me apologetically. I'm really sorry. We can replace it for you. But I didn't want another phone. I wanted answers. I took the phone back, ignoring the clerk's offer, and headed home. My mind raced with possibilities. What if the previous owner was telling the truth? What if the phone was indeed cursed? That night, I prepared myself once more, my nerves frayed and my patience worn thin. I set up a video camera to record everything and sat in the dark, waiting for the call. Midnight came, and the phone rang. The same caller ID, number not in service. I answered it, my hand trembling. What do you want from me? I demanded. The heavy breathing filled my ear, followed by the faint whispers. This time, they were clearer. You took what was mine, the voice repeated. Return it, or face the consequences. A shiver ran down my spine. I don't know what you mean. I pleaded, but the call ended as abruptly as it had begun. Frustrated and terrified, I reviewed the recording. The audio captured the breathing and the whispers, but there was something else. A shadowy figure seemed to flicker on the screen, barely visible but unmistakably there. It stood by the window, watching me. I felt a chill creep over me. Was I being haunted by a ghost? What had I done to deserve this? Over the next few days, the calls continued, each one more menacing than the last. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Return it, they demanded. I felt my sanity slipping. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The shadowy figure appeared more frequently, always lurking at the edge of my vision. I began to question my reality. Was I going mad? Desperate, I reached out to a paranormal investigator. His name was Dr. Samuel Graves, and he had a reputation for dealing with the supernatural. When I explained my situation, he listened intently, his expression grave. It sounds like you're dealing with a vengeful spirit, he said. Something has attached itself to that phone, and it wants something from you. He agreed to come to my house the next night to perform a cleansing ritual. That night, as I waited for Dr. Graves, I felt a sense of impending doom. The clock struck midnight, and the phone rang. My heart pounded in my chest as I answered it. The voice was louder this time, almost a scream. Return it, it shouted. You took what was mine. I dropped the phone in terror, my hands shaking. What could it possibly want? Dr. Samuel Graves arrived promptly at 11. He was a tall, thin man with sharp features and a demeanor that exuded calm confidence. He carried a small leather case, which he set down carefully on my coffee table. Let's get started, he said, his voice steady and reassuring. He began to unpack his tools, candles, incense, a silver bell, and a worn leather-bound book filled with arcane symbols. As he arranged the items around the room, he explained the process. The spirit is bound to the phone, likely due to some traumatic event or unfinished business. The goal is to sever that connection and send it back to where it belongs. He lit the candles and incense, filling the room with a heady, soothing scent. The air grew thick with anticipation as he began to chant in a low, rhythmic tone. I watched him work, a mixture of hope and fear swirling inside me. The clock ticked closer to midnight, and my anxiety mounted. Dr. Graves continued his chanting, his voice growing louder and more commanding. He rang the silver bell, its clear, sharp tone cutting through the air. As the final stroke of midnight sounded, the phone rang once more. The dreaded caller ID flashed, number not in service. Dr. Graves motioned for me to answer it. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The heavy breathing returned, followed by the now familiar voice. "Return it," the spirit demanded, its tone filled with fury and desperation. Dr. Graves stepped forward, chanting louder, his voice merging with the spirit's cries. The air around us seemed to vibrate with energy. Suddenly, the room grew icy cold. A dark shadow materialized before us, taking the form of a gaunt, sorrowful figure. Its eyes were hollow, and its mouth open in a silent scream. "What do you want?" I cried out, my voice breaking. The figure pointed a skeletal finger at the phone in my hand. "You took what was mine," it rasped, its voice filled with sorrow and rage. Dr. Graves raised his hands, his chanting reaching a fever pitch. "I command you to release your hold on this world," he shouted. The spirit recoiled, its form flickering and fading. "Return to the realm of the dead." Dr. Graves rang the bell once more, and the spirit let out a final, anguished wail before dissolving into nothingness. The phone fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. I sank to the floor, overwhelmed with relief. Dr. Graves knelt beside me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. "The spirit is gone." I wanted to believe him, to feel the weight lift from my soul, but a lingering sense of unease remained. Had we truly vanquished the spirit, or was it merely lying in wait? The following days were eerily quiet. The calls had stopped, and the shadowy figure no longer haunted my periphery. But a sense of foreboding lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to return to my normal routine, but the events of the past weeks had left a mark on me. I was no longer the skeptic who scoffed at ghost stories. I had seen the darkness that lurked just beyond our reality. One evening, as I was cleaning the house, I found an old, dusty envelope tucked away in a drawer. It was addressed to the previous owner of the phone. Curious, I opened it and pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a young woman holding the very phone that now lay on my nightstand. Her eyes were wide with fear, and behind her, barely visible, was the shadowy figure that had haunted me. The back of the photograph was inscribed with a single word, "Forgive." A chill ran down my spine. What had this woman done to anger the spirit? Had she been the one to take what was his? I knew I had to find out. My peace of mind depended on it. Determined to uncover the truth, I set out to find the woman in the photograph. Her name was Alice Morgan, and after some digging, I discovered she had lived just a few towns over. I drove to the address listed on the old envelope, a sense of dread settling in my chest. The house was abandoned, its windows boarded up and the yard overgrown with weeds. I stood on the cracked sidewalk, staring at the decaying structure. This was where it all began. I forced open the front door, the smell of dust and decay filling my nostrils. The interior was just as neglected as the exterior. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and cobwebs draped the corners. I felt an unnatural chill as I stepped inside, the air heavy with the sense of something long forgotten. I moved cautiously through the rooms, searching for any clue that might explain what had happened to Alice. In the living room, I found a stack of old letters and photographs. They chronicled a happy life that had slowly descended into fear and paranoia. The letters spoke of strange calls and shadowy figures, mirroring my own experiences. One letter, dated just a week before Alice disappeared, caught my eye. It was addressed to her sister, Rebecca, pleading for help. "The calls won't stop," it read. "He wants his phone back." I don't know how to appease him. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but saw nothing. I was alone in the house. Or was I? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I continued my search, determined to find something that would help me understand the spirit's connection to the phone. In the attic, I discovered a small, locked trunk. After prying it open, I found a diary belonging to Alice. The diary detailed her descent into madness. She had found the phone at a flea market, unaware of its dark history. The calls started soon after, and she became obsessed with uncovering the truth. She wrote about a man named Thomas, a former owner of the phone who had died under mysterious circumstances. He was the spirit that haunted her, seeking vengeance for some unknown wrong. Her final entry was chilling. I think I know what he wants. I must return the phone, but it's too late. As I closed the diary, the air around me grew colder. I felt a presence in the room, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing in the shadows, was the spirit of Thomas. His hollow eyes bored into mine, filled with rage and sorrow. "You have what was mine," he hissed, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Return it." I held up the phone, my hands trembling. "How?" I whispered. "How do I return it?" The spirit stepped closer, his form flickering like a candle in the wind. "Forgive," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Forgive and be forgiven." I didn't understand, but I knew I had to try. Clutching the phone, I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer for forgiveness, for both Alice and myself. The room grew silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. When I opened my eyes, the spirit was gone. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe freely. I left the house, the phone still clutched in my hand, and drove home. I knew what I had to do. I returned to the store and handed the phone back to the clerk. "Destroy it," I said. "It carries a curse." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sense of peace. The calls had stopped, and the shadowy figure no longer haunted me. But as I drifted off to sleep, my phone rang. Heart pounding, I glanced at the screen. Number not in service. My blood ran cold. With a shaking hand, I answered the call. A familiar voice whispered, "You cannot escape." The line went dead, and I knew the horror was far from over. The spirit's curse had not been broken. It had only just begun. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.